All right. Welcome, everybody. Seemed like a long afternoon for some reason. I think it had something to do with the time change, but 3 o'clock felt like 4 o'clock, and 4 o'clock felt like 5 o'clock, and here we are. 6 o'clock. Six 6:20 feels like 7:20, and what are we still doing at the beginning of a sermon here? But nonetheless, engaged in the battle for truth. I want to talk about private faith versus public faith. We're living in interesting times, in challenging times, in times in which there's a lot of groupthink in our society. And the biblical antidote to that is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12, where the Apostle Paul says, "We are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding." I am deeply concerned lately about societal thought control tendencies and the net effect that has in silencing the voice of New Testament Christians that needs to be heard as much as ever, perhaps. But there are certainly hot issues in society related to it. I don't know that I have ever seen a more polarized United States of America. And it's not only that we're in an election season, it just seems that culturally and in terms of worldviews, there are such deep-seated divisions and even animosities that are not healthy for our country, but they are fueled even more so when red flags of accusations are raised in the name of controlling a narrative that might be another word in the minds of some for propaganda. Napoleon once said, "History is a set of lies agreed upon." And others have said, well, the winners write history. And of course, that doesn't provide a lot of consolation for the losers. But nonetheless, this problem of shaping a narrative has always existed. But we live in a time in which we are acutely aware of it for various reasons, maybe the internet, social media, and so on. We live in a time in which one of the hot button issues that many are calling out is this whole cancel culture thing, in which nonconformists or those that are viewed as nonconformists are canceled or treated as less than equal players at the table, so to speak. But again, a lot of polarization, a lot of divisions in worldview that are so pronounced these days, and maybe social media has given extra impact that accompanies it, if not outright hatred and venting that occurs, and we see calls for free speech or concerns about the lack of free speech. And when I was first putting these thoughts together, I had no idea that this last week the CEOs of Twitter, Google, and Facebook would be appearing before the Senate. I had no idea of that, but there are concerns these days about hate speech. There was a law bandied about in Great Britain here that I heard about this last week about hate speech being outlawed even in the privacy of one's home, whatever that means. There are all kinds of issues with fact checkers, and again, many of you work for companies that are under the gun here, and it may be a no-win situation. There are multiple ways of looking at this, Maybe it's healthy. Society raises some of these issues. There have been all outcries of media bias and double standards in the educational system. There are definitely agendas that seem like they have come out of the devil's playbook, at least for Christian parents, that need to be uh, extra vigilant, it seems to me, these days, with choices that you make in monitoring of what kind of a mental diet the kids are fed in the name of education. Um, I wonder what America will look like 50 years from now. And what I am a little bit concerned about, and maybe more than a little bit, is that if certain freedoms are lost, and if we take any kind of giant steps toward totalitarianism, then I know from history, as one who has a more than passing interest in it, that historically totalitarian regimes have never been friendly to biblical Christianity. And so I'm more than a little bit concerned about some of the trends in society that I see occurring these days. Are we on the way to an Orwellian dystopia that is in the offing some years from now? I already see indications of it. It seems to me that one of the laws of unintended consequences at play is the building of safety nets that ultimately has the unintended consequence of costing us freedom in the long run. For example, in the recent book, The Coddling of the American Mind, two authors whose worldview is anything but my own, nevertheless, raise some what I believe are legitimate red flags. In the first chapter, they argue that over the last few decades, they give this as kind of a societal metaphor. Peanut allergies are on the rise. In fact, I have a grandson who has a peanut allergy, and over time, his parents, my daughter and son-in-law, have worked with doctors to alleviate that allergy, and he's now eating like a couple of peanuts a day, and he's going to do that the rest of his life to overcome the peanut allergy. But he had to work up to that point by consuming a little tiny minuscule portion of peanut dust, and over time he's been able to overcome that. But interestingly enough, the authors suggest that studies have actually been done that as parents have caught wind of the dangers of peanut allergies and have protected their kids from even eating peanuts, peanut allergies from potentially overprotective parents have actually risen rather than gone down, because kids who are going to overcome that need to be exposed to peanuts, if indeed. So it's actually worked in the opposite. And they raise the issue of immune systems have to be exposed to certain things. And if they're not, the immune system is actually weaker. And then they move from those illustrations to the idea of being exposed to thought patterns that might be outside a certain box. And in the whole idea of the coddling of the American mind is the creation of barriers and safe spaces and things of that nature in which people are not exposed to worldviews different than their own, and then they don't know how to deal with that in a civil way that Americans maybe once dealt with that. Recently, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and one of the things that you saw in the news probably was that Justice Ginsburg had a great relationship with Justice Scalia, even though they came from very different ends of the political spectrum, and yet they had each other in each other's homes. They had a long-standing friendship. That's the exception rather than the rule in the modern United States of America. and not a good thing. And part of the reason, I think, is we have become socially unable to deal with people who don't think like we think, and the whole group think echo chamber thing has even gone to the point that people have said, you're an enemy if you don't hate everyone else that I hate. And we see that kind of thinking all over the place in our society. And it reminds me of a book that many of you may have read a long time ago, 1984, George Orwell, where you had thought control, thought police, and party slogans everywhere. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And you have a flipping of all of that in something that is Orwellian brainwashing. Seems to me that as a society, we are creating fertile ground for that kind of thing. I don't think it's healthy. And at this point in my own life, I hate to see New Testament Christians not trying to be peacemakers. I've made whopper mistakes of my own, even on social media. But I think that this last year, I've seen people in the world and even New Testament Christians make gigantic mistakes in terms of arguing tooth and nail about things that they need to let go. I personally am, and I say this 2 days before an election, I'm probably less political than I ever have been in my life. 32% of the Protestant pastors in this country are going public with a political recommendation of a candidate this year. And I don't believe the church has any place for that. I am sickened by partisan wrangling. I'm sickened by some of the things I see on social media. But that said, that doesn't mean that that each of us should not have convictions that involve even public policy, or that we ought not to share ideas from time to time in a way that hopefully would be godly and righteous. I am, if I have any political interest, I have a very, very high interest as a Christian, both historically and theologically, in the First Amendment. I believe very strongly in the freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religious expression against any state religion that might put people in a pigeonhole. I am in sympathy with founders of our country and the colonists who came over, who were nonconformists, separatists, Puritans, that wanted to get away from corruption in state-sponsored oppression. And so I'm very sensitive to that. And if I were to fight for anything besides my faith in Jesus Christ, I think it would be for freedom of speech. And because that undergirds virtually everything else that would be near and dear to my heart, personally speaking. But I will not engage in political representation of one party or another, or one candidate or another. As far as I am concerned, both parties are equal opportunity offenders. I have been disappointed across the spectrum with corruption that I see in the world in general, and politics in specifically. But that said, it's hard to be a New Testament Christian and hold to the faith of the Lord Jesus without people in the world pigeonholing one for positions that we hold near and dear to our faith. And it hurts me that people of faith might be afraid, because of some of the trends in society, to go public with with ideas and sharing those ideas. If we are truly to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, then we ought to be able to talk publicly about things that in some quarters of our society might even call hate speech. Uh, can we even raise issues about the right to life issues and abortion? Can we even talk publicly about sexual gender issues? If we are pigeonholed and if we are branded as haters by doing that, even if we package those things in as the most tactful way we can possibly package them, and the most kind and loving way that we could possibly package them, um, we are putting ourselves at risk. And I see dangers in that if we get to the point where we think we can't even raise issues that are raised in the Word of God. In the public square, I am concerned about people of biblical faith branded in various ways or excluded in various ways because of our worldview, because of our faith, because of our religion. It seems to me that anyone who takes any position on sexual gender issues is ultimately taking a philosophical religious position. I don't care who they are. And yet it's not always viewed that way in the larger culture. I have known of scientists who are believers. I'll give you a case in point. There is a book that I have in my library from two scientists who are very accomplished, and they argue for intelligent design. They are not hardcore creationists by any means. They're not hardcore young earth creationists, especially. All they're arguing for in this book is there are amazing there's amazing data that would lead one to believe that there's intelligent design in the universe. And one of these scientists, one of these authors, lost his tenure at a major university simply because he was a co-author of this book. I believe that the book is brilliantly argued, but he was shunned from academia simply because he writes this brilliantly argued book. I've known of medical researchers who've challenged various aspects of big pharma with alternative approaches to certain health issues, who have had their lives made miserable for them in various ways. And I could actually name names of people, but I've also read books and have heard of cases in which alternative approaches to big pharma with deeply invested, big, huge money interests have brought to bear various things. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist on this, but I've actually heard of cases where people have suddenly disappeared because they've challenged the status quo in that area. Shenanigans in investment banks and covert government operations. Is Edward Snowden a goat or a hero? We could argue that one, I suppose. But I could tell you about a certain man who had rock solid evidence of big bank manipulation of the precious metals market, which he brought to a New York newspaper. And the New York editor said, "You've got a brilliant case here, but I can never print this for fear of being knocked off." Those kinds of things happen in the real world. There is major corruption in high places, and again, I'm frustrated about that. I posted a little blurb during the beginnings of this COVID-19 thing. There was a French researcher who happened to be a Nobel Prize winning scientist who floated an idea about the origins of this virus. I think he still might be right. There's enough questions surrounding that I don't know. But what I posted was flagged, and it was actually removed from Facebook. Nobel Prize-winning scientist. He may be wrong, for all I know, but I at least believe he has a right to be heard. He's earned that right. So I'm concerned about that. But what I'm really concerned about, more than all these other things put together, is what happens when those of us who hold a biblical worldview are targeted. I don't know if you heard, but yesterday, a Greek Orthodox priest was attacked and wounded with a shotgun in Lyon, France, after Islamic extremists killed 3 people with a knife in a Catholic church in Nice, France. And pastors and religious leaders everywhere in France are on red alert right now. But what if that should happen here? Could a Christian go onto a university campus and even talk about the biblical view of human sexuality without getting attacked? I'm not so sure about that. So I wonder about larger trends in our society. And what should the Christian response be to some of these trends? Should we surrender in order to conform to society around us? I'm going to have a spirited conversation with Shane Scott about that this week after next, about the pressure to conform and to surrender key elements of the faith just to fit into society around us. I don't believe that's the answer. We are to be transformed, not conformed to this world, Romans 12:1 and 2. Other Christians will say, well, I'll just kind of fly under the radar and completely withdraw and isolate myself in non-involvement. Do we do nothing because God is in control and just say, okay, I won't ever say anything or do anything to ruffle anybody's feathers because everybody's so sensitive about certain things that I may hold near and dear because I happen to be a New Testament Christian? I don't think that's the answer either. Even though there's a right way to say things and a wrong way to say things, and right approaches and unwise approaches. I believe after everything's said and done, we have to be actively engaged with the world around us. We have no choice but to be actively engaged with the world around us. But even if we are shunned for it, realize that the kingdom of God will ultimately prevail regardless of what may happen to us. Jeremiah 29 and verse 7 says that when the Judahites would go away into Babylonian captivity, the admonition of the Lord is this: but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And so I believe that we have an obligation to be publicly engaged and to pray for society around us. I am not primarily an American. I am primarily a kingdom of the citizen of heaven, but I am concerned about America. I'm concerned for the sake of my kids, for the sake of my grandkids, about what things will be when they get to be my age, for example. The serenity prayer comes to mind. And maybe this is good thoughts to think about in light of all of this. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We all ought to be praying those kinds of thoughts, but certainly it doesn't mean just playing it safe. Albert Einstein once said, a ship is always safe at the shore, but that is not what it is built for. There comes a point at which every New Testament Christian has to stand up and be counted. Now, we may have a good living room discussion about where to draw the line on some of those things, but there are real world issues that are facing us at a distressful and critical time in our nation's history such as this. And I believe God has not called us to silence. regarding those things. I think about all the heroes of faith. Did they slip into a comfortable conformity with the world around them? When you think of Noah or Moses or David or Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did they just decide to raise their white flag of surrender and I'm not going to say anything or do anything that ruffles anybody's feathers. I'm just going to kind of fit in. That's not the kind of lives that they lived, and that's not the kind of life that God calls us to live. There is no virtue in anyone believing a lie. No virtue whatsoever in ever believing a lie. 2 Thessalonians 2:10 through 12. With all deception, wicked deception, for those who are perishing because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. There's no virtue in believing a lie, in anybody believing a lie. We may say on the day of judgment, well, I couldn't help myself. They lied to me. You have accountability for believing truth and not lies. All of us do. There's great virtue on the other side of that coin in believing the truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, Jesus says in John 8:32. And yet we live in a world of competing agendas, competing narratives, competing philosophies. How do we navigate our course in a world in which there is such vitriol? And it's hard to even get one word of truth out without someone blasting us, perhaps. I think we need to realize that ultimately, this is a spiritual fight. I may have some convictions about things that I've studied in the Bible that are viewed by some sections of this society, some segments of this society as political in nature. But to me, those studied conclusions from the Bible have nothing to do with politics. They have everything to do with faith. There are certain moral and spiritual positions that we have to take as Christians by virtue of our faith. The ultimate battle that we face is against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. It's not flesh and blood. It's Satan and his angels, his demons that are all around us, tempting us, wanting us to sin, wanting us to compromise. And the devil doesn't play fair. It's just a fact of life. He doesn't put up a fair fight. He cheats, he lies, he deceives, he marginalizes, he politicizes, he accuses, he falsely accuses. And regardless of different groups in society being targeted, if I am a conspiracy theorist to this extent, I will say this. There is a conspiracy in the heavenly places of wickedness among the devil and his angels, and he's after us. That I am sure of. He's called in the Bible the accuser of our brethren. And we are the ultimate target. In Zechariah 3:1 and 2, we read, then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord has chosen Jerusalem, who has chosen Jerusalem, to rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked from the fire? Satan's business is to accuse us. Even in Revelation 12, which we kind of glossed over this last Wednesday, we read about the fact that we are the ultimate target. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. And the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. The devil's business is to accuse you. Your business is to resist and to conquer him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of your testimony. But make no mistake about it. The devil already has everyone else. He wants you. He wants the people of God. That's where the ultimate battle is fought. So can we ignore evil in our own lives or in society around us? Edmund Burke once said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. The Bible puts it this way, Isaiah 57 and verse 1, the righteous man perishes and no one lays it to heart. Devout men are taken away while no one understands. I believe that's happening in real time before our very eyes in this country. Amos chapter 5 verse 10, they hate him who reproves in the gate. They abhor him who speaks the truth. I've said before, and I'll say it again, historically, I see a lot of parallels between some of the trends that I see happening in this country in 2020 and some of the things I see historically in Germany in the late 1920s and the early 1930s, leading up to the Nazis gaining power. If you want a good read on that, Eric Metaxas's book, Bonhoeffer, develops this brilliantly, and I would highly recommend that book. But shortly after World War II, there was a German Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller, who wrote a poem called First They Came. And it's about the cowardice of German intellectuals and certain clergy, including by his own admission, Niemöller himself, following the Nazis' rise to power and subsequent incremental purging of their chosen targets, group after group after group. These words are emblazoned in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. One of the accusations against Christians in the 2nd century AD is that they are antisocial because they would not go along with the program of the idolatry and immorality that was common in the 2nd century Roman Empire. One thing I'm sure of is that we need to speak up. Not for political agendas, but for God's agenda. Christians are, have been, and always will be perceived as a danger to a society that is increasingly totalitarian in its thought control. We need to fight for truth. We need to fight for the free exchange of ideas, freedom of speech, the right of people to think for themselves, the right to challenge the status quo and not go along with the party line. And even if some of the speech we engage in, some of the conclusions that we've reached, even if that should be considered hate speech, I would tell you in no uncertain terms that Christianity tends to thrive when there is freedom of thought, when there's a free exchange of ideas, when society is open, and when we can discuss things even when we disagree. But if society should ever become outright hostile to our beliefs and practices, what we must say in no uncertain terms that I will stand up and be counted anyway. I will never surrender the faith. I will not cease and desist as a Christian. I may have to adjust to the new realities, but I will be faithful to the Lord no matter what. Faithful to the point of death, Revelation 2 and verse 10, no matter what. In the bigger scheme of things, if we privatize our beliefs, if we are attacked to the point of questioning prevailing societal narratives, simply because we question societal narratives to the point that we are silenced, what kind of world are we contributing to? What kind of example are we bequeathing to our children and to our grandchildren? And what kind of contributions are we making to the future of God's kingdom if we are silent at such a time as this? Finally, I want to say this. We can't wave our hand as if a magic wand and make society what it ought to be. We can only do what we can do in our small corner of the world, so to speak. But we also need to realize that a Christian is a powerful force in this wicked world. Even if we cannot force people around us to change, even if society continues to deteriorate, even if there's widespread corruption, even if there is increasing hostility to biblical faith, we can pray. We can model integrity ourselves. We can love our enemies, even as ourselves, and try to avoid inflammatory language that prejudices their minds against the truth. Again, I have not always done a good job of that, but I'm working on it, and we're all a work in progress in that regard. We can exemplify calm and respectful discourse. We can be an example of what life-changing truth can do for people. People need to see genuine, real New Testament Christians in action. Because the devil's propaganda is all around us. 2 Corinthians 4:4, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. And what we can do in no uncertain terms. 2 Timothy 2:24 through 26, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. One more PowerPoint slide, and it smacks of political. One placard, forgive me this, Jesus. Jesus. If we have perspective that Jesus is our all in all, we will not put too much trust in human leaders that will disappoint us, nor will we get too disappointed if the country should move a direction that we do not desire. Let's all rally around Jesus. And in the end, the cause will be better for it. We will be better for it. And everyone whose life is touched by our lives will be better for it. Let's sing an invitation song.